we got a piece about your boy Thomas Massie, and this guy, I have grown. I really disliked him on the whole gun thing, but I gotta say, I think the integrity that this guy has maybe even shifted my views on that a little bit. So watch this. This is a piece from Rising where they talk about how Thomas Massie is one of the only
somewhat surprising position.
One of the only Republicans who's actually in opposition to funding the war in Gaza.
When it comes to the Israel-Hamas war and getting a lot of flack for it, Kentucky Republican Representative Thomas Massie calls himself a true conservative. He recently joined Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene in a failed vote to oust Speaker Johnson. But when it comes to war, the nation's national affairs correspondent John Nichols points out that he's siding with progressives. Here's Massie explaining his position to Glenn Greenwald back in December.
What is your view on the overall U.S. support for Israel in terms of money? And what's your view specifically of President Biden's new request for $14 billion more, at least to start with, to fund this new war?
Well, let me be clear. I don't single out any country with my ideology. I don't support foreign aid. My position is that we are almost $34 trillion in debt. We can't afford to help other countries. A lot of times foreign aid is taking from the middle class in one country and giving it to the rich in another country. And in the case of Israel, their debt to GDP is in a better position than our debt to GDP. So I don't, particularly with respect to Israel, I don't understand why we have to send them money from my constituents in Kentucky.
Racist!
Now, for that fairly reasonable take, he has been
anti-Semitism,
been targeted by AIPAC and survived that challenge. Here to break it all down with us is John Nichols himself. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be with both of you.
All right, so help us understand what happened. What was the scale of the AIPAC?
No, I'm critical of anyone who writes for The Nation, but I think this guy is pretty solid.
Attack on Massie, and what happened?
Well, I think we have to put it in perspective. Remember that AIPAC has made it clear that they want to go after a number of members of Congress who they view as voting in a way that is unsatisfactory to them and is unsatisfactory to their position, which is very pro Netanyahu government in Israel. And most of the media coverage of that is suggested, oh, well, they're going after Democrats or going after members of the squad.
That's like how they're trying to minimize this. Like, oh, it's just Netanyahu. If we just replace Netanyahu, everything will be okay. It's the Netanyahu
AOC and Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman and folks like that. One of the things I wanted to point out is that there is a Republican who has frequently voted with the squad on some of these issues and with more progressive Democrats on some of these issues. Believe me, he breaks with them on everything else, just about, but has voted with them on these issues. He, too, has been targeted by AIPAC. And
I did a piece a couple months ago now, where Massie was praising AOC and Ilhan Omar for being against the override switch in vehicles that would allow the government or people to take over control of your car. So they align on quite a few things, I think.
AIPAC's been going after Massie on a
maybe not quite a few, but a couple at least.
Couple of levels. They say they're not playing in particular congressional races, that they're more broadly trying to educate Kentuckians about Thomas Massie. In part, that's because I think they fear that when Mitch McConnell's Senate seat comes open, Massie may well run for it. But in the run-up to Massie's primary, which was a week ago, or a little roughly, AIPAC came in with a very substantial amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, in advertising that identified Massie as, a bad player as regards Middle East politics and portrayed him as a very dangerous figure, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of kind of brushing it off, Massie made a big deal about it. He said, look, these folks are coming after me because of the votes I've cast, because of where I stand.
So that goes back to what Trump's response to the indictment. People respect when you have the balls to stand up to this bullshit.
And so it became an issue that people were conscious of in the district. And Massie won 76% of the vote, an overwhelming landslide. And one of his opponents, I mean, I don't think his opponents were all that strong, but one of his opponents was a former Republican, former candidate for the Republican nomination for the governorship in Kentucky. So it wasn't exactly a low-profile opponent. And Massie just swept. And the point that he has made is that he believes it is possible to stand up to critics, especially on some of these issues. And it is, I think, a very interesting.
In the new media landscape, whether it's in politics or entertainment or whatever, people respect integrity and honesty and someone who's willing to stand with their principles despite all of the fucking noise around them. And this is one of the reasons I want to show this, because it's inspiring to me that a guy like Thomas Massie is he's gonna win. You know, he there's a potential he could be the senator now, and the people of Kentucky saw through the bullshit.
Note as regards sort of the broader politics of these issues in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, if I was running as a Republican in a deeply red district in Kentucky or a state like that, I would want some ideological opponent to highlight how opposed I was to foreign aid. I mean, that the idea that, he would say this is not at all.
I love the way Thomas Massie framed that too, because did you hear what he said? He said, "What I see is taking from the middle class in one country and giving to the rich in another country. That's our foreign policy."
A deviation from his conservative philosophy or from his fiscal conservatism. On the contrary, Republicans who say they're for small government or for fixing the debt or doing any of those things, but are happy to both support policies that interfere abroad and then ship American tax dollars overseas, those are the people criticizing their principles. He's saying,
sound drop.
Isn't it ironic? Don't you think? Isn't it ironic?
He's perfectly consistent. And when his constituents hear about this, this is the America First view that Donald Trump purports to represent, I would argue, incredibly imperfectly. And that would be, even saying that is kind of a compliment he doesn't deserve. But this is the actual ideology of the Republican base is, yes, to be more non-interventionist, to not support foreign military entanglement, and to not send American tax dollars overseas.
And people who think that way will be called isolationists, which is like, a way to call someone racist when they oppose foreign wars. No, I'm not even against supporting other countries in the right circumstance, when there's a really good, legitimate reason to do so. But this just like funneling our money to other countries. Like I've shown you the graph that shows like foreign policy investments over the years that it's like billions and billions as countries shift up and down. And it's crazy. As things crumble around us, like who with any kind of common sense can support that? So anyway, listen to this. I thought this was good. Bree kind of explains the attack ads that they ran against Massie, that AIPAC ran against them.
Intensity of the attack on Massie and the amount of money that AIPAC was able to spend. It bought $300,000 of ads in the lead up to this election. And one of those ads read, "Israel, the Holy Land, is under attack by Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Congressman Tom Massie." That was the nature of this attack. And in this case,
Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, Thomas Massie. Same thing. This is how ridiculous this whole debate, this whole argument has gotten. Like I love when people call the Hamas or like the people in Gaza the Nazis, or try to equate them to the Nazis, as if them getting stomped has any parallels whatsoever to the Nazis. They don't even have a state. They don't have an army. They don't have tanks. They don't have missiles or air, warfare tactics. They like live in tunnels under the ground, and we're supposed to believe they've been driven into tunnels under the ground, and we're supposed to believe they're the Nazis. Okay.
Obviously, he was not only successful, he was overwhelmingly successful in a way that kind of can be read as an indictment of AIPAC's strategy. However, that has not been the outcome in so many other races. AIPAC brags about
this is actually really good and something to watch for, because what Bree describes right here is so important. They're going to realize that running those ads like that against, they pay consultants millions upon millions of dollars to study and come up with messaging. They're going to realize that hey, he's with Hamas, or, he's anti-Israel, or he's anti-foreign entanglements message isn't going to work, and they're going to adjust to something more effective. So listen to this.
What a good kind of win-loss ratio it has. I have covered a great deal about progressives who have come under attack, including, I think, most notoriously Nina Turner in Ohio's 11th district, where AIPAC took a slightly different approach. And I want to ask you whether you think that AIPAC is shifting strategy here. In that race, they did not foreground the idea that Nina Turner is sort of bad for Israel, as it were. What they did was try to smear her as not a genuine progressive. For example, sending out.
That is so key right there, because that's an attack that works with Democrats. I don't think it might work on the libertarian right with someone like Thomas Massie, but you have to remember that whenever you see these interlopers and these people that come in on Twitter like, oh, like I won't rally with right wingers because they're anti-trans or whatever, that is this type of thing. That is Israel, not Israel, but this is like political money being used to fucking market and turn movements against each other. And that's exactly what they're like she said with Nina Turner. They kind of indicted her. They what's the word? Sculpted their messaging to be like, oh, look at Nina Turner. She's not a real progressive. She likes cops because her husband is a cop or something like that. So that's the kind of stuff they can use to sink the left. I don't know that that's going to work as well with someone like Thomas Massie, but they'll find something that does. They'll keep spending millions and millions of dollars until something does stick. So be aware of that.
Flyers that characterized her vote against the DNC platform as a vote criticizing the platform because it was too progressive, when in fact it was because it was not progressive enough. And it seemed like AIPAC was self-conscious of looking like it was a foreign lobbying group that was interfering in domestic elections and putting a bad taste in voters' mouth who might not be personally invested in Israel per se. I do wonder what you make of the explicit nature of AIPAC's strategy in Massie's race, and whether you think the kind of shifting political attitudes toward Israel because of the way it's conducting its military campaign in Gaza is going to have an effect on AIPAC's ability to spend in these races.
You put a lot of important issues on the table. And the first thing that I think it's important to understand is we're talking about super PAC associated with AIPAC. And super PACs tend to hire sophisticated political insiders to figure out how best to approach different races. And that's important to understand. That happens across the board. It's not just AIPAC or super PACs associated with it. They look for the strategy that they think will work best in a particular setting. I think that by and large, we have seen circumstances where the attacks have been and probably will continue to be on other issues, not necessarily on Israel, right? Or not necessarily on Gaza. And I think you're going to continue to see that in many of these races where Democrats are targeted. In Kentucky, I think what happened was, and again, this is speculation to some extent, but I think they were thinking, Kentucky has a very, very large Christian fundamentalist, Christian conservative bloc of voters. And many of them have been given a lot of messages as regards Christian Zionism and maybe Christian support for Israel. And I think they felt that this ad might drive a wedge, right? That it might convince some portion of voters, very conservative voters, that Thomas Massie wasn't their guy.
Well, it didn't work, thankfully. But I just wanted to highlight this mostly because cheers to Thomas Massie for having real values and actually sticking to them. And then second, just to watch for this type of, this guy went really into the weeds on the type of political machinations that get used to throw out people that are generally pretty good. I might disagree with Nina Turner on some stuff, but overall she's got the right idea. You know what I mean? And it's so the person that they ended up getting into Congress instead of Nina Turner is way worse. She's like a total scumbag. So we as voters and human beings have to be watching for this kind of shit, because it happens all the time. And